My name is Melanie Sinclair, and I'm 45 years old. I stood at the edge of the reception tent holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, watching my son Nathaniel dance with his new wife under a canopy of string lights. The band played something soft and slow, and for the first time in months, I let myself feel proud instead of tired. Nathaniel looked so happy. He kept glancing over at me between spins, like he wanted to make sure I was still there, still watching. I was. I wouldn't have missed this for anything. I hadn't worked in 8 months. Not because I didn't want to, but because the accounting firm I'd been with for 11 years collapsed overnight when the parent company folded, and every application I'd sent out since had vanished into silence. I'd been living in the guest house behind my sister Diane's property since my divorce finalized last spring, paying what little rent I could manage, running the groceries, watching her kids on weekends so she and her husband could have their date nights. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself things would turn around. But 8 months of rejection emails does something to a person's spine. It makes you smaller. It makes you apologize for things you shouldn't have to apologize for. Diane had never let me forget it. Not really. She loved me, I think, in her own complicated way. But she also loved reminding people how far she climbed and how far I'd fallen. She ran a boutique event planning company now, wore blazers that cost more than my old monthly rent, and had opinions about everyone's life choices except her own. I'd learned to smile through her comments at family dinners. I'd learned to let most of it roll off me. That night, though, she wasn't rolling anything off. She was holding court near the dessert table with a small circle of Nathaniel's colleagues, laughing loudly, gesturing with her wine glass, clearly enjoying being the center of attention at her nephew's wedding. I walked over to say hello, because that's what you do, because it was a happy night, and I didn't want to make it about anything else. "Oh, and this is my sister Melanie," Diane said as I approached, sliding her arm around my shoulder in a gesture that looked warm from a distance, but felt like a trap up close. She turned to the tall, silver-haired man standing beside her, someone I didn't recognize. "Melanie's the unemployed one who lives off the family. Bless her heart, she's been staying in our guest house since her divorce. We just try to keep her busy." The words landed like ice water down my back. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I heard the laughter of the two women near Diane, that polite, uncomfortable kind of laugh people give when they're not sure if something's a joke. My face went hot, and I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. 8 months of silence had trained me well. The man beside Diane didn't laugh. He didn't even smile at first. He just looked at me. Really looked. The way you look at someone you're trying to place. Then something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, and he extended his hand toward me instead of toward my sister. "Melanie Sinclair," he said slowly, like he was testing the name in his mouth. "You wrote the restructuring proposal for Whitlow Manufacturing back in 2019. I still reference it in training materials. I've been trying to track you down for 2 years." I stared at him, completely lost. Diane's smile had frozen on her face, that particular kind of frozen that happens when a story stops going the way you planned it. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Have we met?" "Not directly," he said, "but I've read your work. I'm Gerald Ashworth. I run the operations division at Caldwell Bishop Group." He paused, and something in his eyes sharpened, turned cold, aimed somewhere just past my shoulder. "I'm also your son's boss." The air around us seemed to still. Diane's laugh died somewhere in her throat. I could see her recalculating, the way people do when the ground shifts beneath a lie they've told too many times. Gerald turned his gaze fully toward my sister then, and his voice, when it came, was quiet, measured, and absolutely without warmth. "I choose your words more carefully next time," he said to her, "especially about people you don't actually know." Diane opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I watched her face move through 3 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds: confusion, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like fear. I had no idea what any of this meant yet. Why this stranger knew my name. Why he was looking at my sister like she'd just made the worst mistake of her professional life. All I knew was that the ground beneath this entire night had cracked wide open, and none of us were ready for what was about to fall through it. Gerald didn't say anything else to Diane right away. He simply turned back to me, his expression softening the way it had before, as if the coldness he'd shown her was a door he'd already closed and locked behind him. "Would you mind if we stepped away for a moment?" he asked. "I'd like to actually speak with you, if you're willing." I glanced at Diane, still standing there frozen, her wine glass tilted slightly in her hand like she'd forgotten she was holding it. I didn't wait for her to recover. I nodded to Gerald and let him guide me a few steps away from the dessert table, out toward the quieter edge of the tent, where the string lights thinned and the music softened into background noise. "I need to explain something," Gerald said once we were alone. 3 years ago, Whitlow Manufacturing was about to collapse. 200 jobs on the line. Somebody on their finance team put together a restructuring proposal that saved the company. I read that proposal when I was brought in as a consultant, and it was, without exaggeration, the smartest piece of financial strategy I'd seen in 15 years of doing this work. I asked around for months, trying to find out who wrote it. Nobody could tell me. The credit had gotten buried under a director's name. He took it to his next job and never mentioned you once. I felt my chest tighten. I remembered that proposal. I remembered the sleepless weeks I'd spent building it, the late nights running numbers until my eyes burned, the quiet satisfaction of watching the company survive because of work nobody outside that building ever saw. And I remembered 2 years later, watching that same director get promoted to a VP role while I got laid off in a restructuring of my own department. No severance conversation, no acknowledgement, just a box for my desk items and a security escort to my car. "I found your name eventually," Gerald continued, "buried in an internal document nobody thought to scrub. I've been trying to find you for 2 years, Melanie, because I've been building out a strategic advisory division at Caldwell Bishop, and I've needed someone with exactly your mind running it. I had no idea, walking into this wedding tonight, that I was standing 3 feet away from you the whole time." I didn't know what to say. My throat had closed up completely. 8 months of silence. 8 months of feeling invisible, of feeling like maybe I really was what Diane had just called me in front of a crowd. And here was a stranger telling me my work had mattered more than I'd ever been allowed to know. "I don't have a business card on me," Gerald said, almost apologetic now. "But I'd like you in my office Monday morning. Not for an interview, for a job offer. Director of Strategic Operations. I'll have my assistant call you tomorrow to sort out the details, but I wanted you to hear it from me first, tonight, in this exact spot." He glanced back toward where Diane was still standing, now surrounded by a few guests who'd clearly overheard enough to start whispering among themselves. And I wanted her to hear it too. I turned to look at my sister. She was watching us from across the tent, her face pale, her earlier bravado completely gone. For 8 months, she had made herself the measure of my worth, had reminded me daily, in ways small and large, of exactly how far I'd fallen in her eyes. And in the span of 5 minutes, a stranger she'd never met had proven, in front of everyone, that she had never known who I really was at all. Nathaniel found me a few minutes later, his eyes wide, clearly having heard some version of events from a co-worker. "Mom," he said quietly, taking both my hands in his. "Is that true? Did Gerald really offer you a position?" "He did," I said, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been coiled tight since the day I packed my desk into that cardboard box. Nathaniel pulled me into a hug, right there at the edge of the dance floor. Over his shoulder, I could see Diane watching us, her mouth pressed into a thin line, unable to find a single word to say. She didn't apologize that night. She wouldn't apologize for weeks, not until the story had made its way through every corner of the extended family, and she realized silence was making her look worse than any apology could. But that night, I didn't need her apology. I needed exactly what I got, the truth, spoken plainly, in front of the people who mattered, by a man who had no reason to lie. I started at Caldwell Bishop 3 weeks later. I moved out of Diane's guest house by the end of that month. And every time I think back to that wedding, I don't dwell on the humiliation of being called an unemployed burden in front of strangers. I think about the exact moment everything changed, the moment I stopped being invisible,